world's fastest GPU is here, and it is a lot smaller than I was expecting. The unboxing embargo has lifted, so I can now show you the card, but no performance numbers or benchmarks just yet. You'll have to wait a couple more days for that. But yeah, at least we can test fit this in a couple different cases, and I can explore my options here in terms of a potential upgrade. But yeah, here it is, the 5090 Founders Edition from NVIDIA. It is a really nice looking card in person. Here it is next to the 4090 FE from the last generation. Really not much difference in terms of the length and the height versus the last gen, but man, the thickness difference, the fact that this is now a 2-slot card, yeah, that does make things quite interesting. Very interesting actually when it comes to compact ITX builds, which is personally what I prefer to build in. This thing will fit in almost all of them out there. And the same goes for the 5070 and 5080 Founders Edition. Those use the exact same cooler from what I've seen in the product details and the product photos, although the colors just look a little bit different. This new cooler design though, I think is going to be problematic for a lot of the ITX builds out there. Think of like a Fractal Terra, which is a super popular example where this backside of the card is actually blocked by a motherboard and a power supply. I mean, the whole intention of this cooler design is so the air can move right through the heatsink, completely uninterrupted. And if you're blocking this part of the card, that hot air just really has nowhere to go. It's just going to build up there, create an increase in pressure on the opposite side of the heatsink. That is the complete opposite of what you want when it comes to ideal cooling. I'll link a video down below by Gamers Nexus where one of NVIDIA's thermal engineers talk about some of these design choices in detail. But yeah, they do seem pretty convinced that this, despite it being a smaller card, is actually an upgrade. The airflow now doesn't need to turn to exit the card at all. The heatsink fin height has now been optimized for different airflow velocities from the fan, as well as the fins being closer together. And they're also now using liquid metal to extract as much heat from the GPU as possible. I feel like NVIDIA always goes pretty overkill for their Founders Edition cards, but I think they really shifted into a different gear for this one. Even the PCIe connector and the I/O are connected by separate cables to the main PCB to have as much exposed, uninterrupted heatsink as they could. Overall, it's a really tidy looking card, a bit more of a darker aesthetic than the 4090 and a bit more neutral too, which I definitely appreciate. They've gone back to the angled power connector as well, which will save more than a few millimeters in height. Very happy to see that. But yeah, NVIDIA actually made this thing smaller while giving it 33% more CUDA cores, 125 watts more power, and 32 gigabytes of GDDR7 memory. The cooling is gonna be interesting, because this is my current PC. It has a 4090 and it's completely liquid cooled. To say this thing has served me well would be an understatement. It just sits under my desk, I barely even know it's there, and it never skips a beat. Chews through absolutely everything that I throw at it, all the video edits, all of the Blender renders. Yeah, this thing is insane and I'm so happy that I built it. I've maybe taken the side panels off like 4 or 5 times in the year and a half that I've been running this thing, and I always forget how much work I put into this thing. But then I remember all of the custom tubing, all of the custom cables that I make, the fan connectors, resoldering the pump cable as well. So many little things that went into this build, and for sure, it has to be my densest, most powerful, and proudest build that I've ever done. It is though right on the limit of what I can cool in this case, and don't get me wrong, it's a lot of cooling. 2 240mm radiators and 5 fans in total. Pretty unbelievable for a sub 10 liter case. But yeah, 4090, it's a 450 watt GPU. The 5090 is a 575 watt GPU, almost 600 watts. So I mean, you do the math, it's not looking very good. But luckily, there is another option, and that is air cooling. Again, can't talk about GPU temps or anything like that, but if this cooler is as good as NVIDIA says it is, then it might actually be worth leaving it on instead of just jumping to water cooling like what I've done with my current build. This is the Form T1, it's the exact same case as what I'm currently using, and there's something that you can do really interesting with this case which popped into my mind, and I was like, damn, that is actually perfect for these new Founders Edition cards, you can use standoffs to create a gap in the middle of the case. What I really want to do here though, and what I think will be truly endgame for a mini 5090 PC, is create an exhaust vent which will extract that hot air from the heatsink. This will also protect the backside of the motherboard from heating up too much, and it will completely eliminate any hot air from the GPU recirculating back into the cooler. The reason I'm so excited to try this is because I've actually done it in the past with a 4090 and a mid tower, and the results were absolutely mind-blowing. I was getting GPU temps on a 4090 that were basically the same as an open test bench, but in a completely closed PC. 3D scanning really comes in clutch here. Instead of manually hand measuring all of the exact positions of everything, like the gap between the 5090 and the motherboard and how high it sits in the case and how far away it is from the fans, I can just roughly 3D scan the build, and within about 10 minutes I have most of what I need. And don't worry, this surface spray evaporates after a couple of hours. I didn't just spray paint a 5090. The scans honestly turned out a bit scrappy, but that's alright. They were really quick scans at the end of the day, and they do tell us everything that we need to know, which is how this build all fits together. From this, I made some very basic models of the components. Still a lot more work to do here, but this is at least a good starting point. Fusion actually has an automated modeling feature, which I think I'll end up using for these exhaust vents. Even just giving it some very basic constraints, a couple of clicks later, it generated something that looked pretty close to what I had in mind. Before I spend time making anything though, we should probably discuss whether this thing is even worth upgrading to in the first place, but for that, you'll have to wait for the next video.